Welcome to the Joke Zero podcast, where we're talking about everything indie filmmaking. And this season, we are focusing on Joke Zero's first ever feature film, Plan B, which is out now. You can watch it on Apple, on Amazon, on Fandango, wherever you like to buy or rent movies. And if you've been listening to the other episodes, you know we are talking to people in front of the camera, behind the camera, people who popped in for a day, producers. And today, I'd say we have one of our most important key members of making this film. We have our cinematographer on today with us, Mike Magilnick. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey Anna, thanks for having me on. Hi Brandon.
Hey, Mike.
What's going on?
Not much. Excited to talk about some of this and go down a little memory lane.
Yeah, of course, because this was not quite a bit ago. It's funny because I know you're like, hold on, what movie was it? No, I'm kidding.
I mean, that's the process though. It takes a little bit of time to go through post once you're done and then to figure out where it's going to land out in the world and who's going to distribute. So, relatively speaking, it's not that long, considering how long it could have been.
I know. You have to be patient in this industry because I bet Brandon wrote this movie even like how long ago did you write it?
Yeah, there were drafts of this script in 2018. Now it's 2024. So there even were ideas of this movie well before that. And I think when I first talked to Mike about we'll get into this a little bit more, but it probably was in 2020, maybe even before that. And we'll jump into that in a little bit.
Mike, you worked on this film the whole time. We've had a lot of people who've popped in and out, we were just saying, but you were in it from start to finish, as our cinematographer. Congrats, first of all, because the movie looks awesome, and I hope you're really proud of it.
Thank you.
And also, I got to know, how did you get your start in the industry?
I actually started really young, which could be an attributing factor to some of the moderate success I feel like I might have had. I started out as a camera operator for public access TV when I was like 12 or 13.
Oh my God.
And then I started shooting like little local commercials and shooting some stuff for the town and like meetings and events and
Where did you grow up?
Monroe, Connecticut. So kind of between like Bridgeport and Danbury for people who know a little bit of Connecticut. It's a relatively small state. But yeah, and then I went to college and I continued to freelance through college and I would skip out on classes for a couple months at a time whenever I got a feature that I could work on and luckily all my professors were very supportive and did what they could to like make sure that that wasn't going to like tank my grades or to like keep feeding me work remotely and work around a lot of that stuff. So I've had a lot of very supportive people throughout my life that have helped to usher me along and find ways to try to advance a little ahead of where maybe I should have been.
Were you in film school? Were you studying film?
I went to broadcast school because, to be honest, I had really bad GPA. I was not a good kid growing up, and it was like the only place I could afford to go, and that would take me.
But you knew you wanted to work in film.
Yeah, I didn't know to what capacity. I actually, my wife, a lot of times when she's stressed about me being on the road for a bit, she'll throw back in my face you were supposed to be an editor.
Now get in the basement.
Yeah, basically, she's like, you're supposed to be home taking care of the cats. But it was one of those things where once I got on set, it was over. I was like bit by the bug, and I was like, oh no, this is where it's at. This is where, I mean, editing is great. It's a very creative medium, and it's a lot of fun. But I really thrive on the collaborative nature and the creativity that you find on set, working with different people with different ideas. And it's just also the adventures of going different places, meeting new people, trying different things. You don't get that in a basement as much.
No. How did you make the leap from like when you said you were like a camera operator at public access or a grip? How did you make that leap to, walk onto a set or like market yourself as I'm a cinematographer, hire me for this now? Was it your own projects or?
It was a little bit more for like on commission based for hire. So I started out public access and then there was a show that the programs at public access were pretty restricted with like they couldn't be for profit, but you could still pay to produce them. So there was a guy who was in the public access program with me that was starting to do a TV show and I guess had been watching some of what I was up to and asked if I was interested in doing this TV show on location. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, we'd like take cameras and lights and microphones and we'll go to these places and film interviews and some B-roll. And that was I think I was like 15 when I started to do that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, this is very interesting. And then like the dynamic problem solving on the day of like, okay, what's the light going to look like and where the camera's going to go and what's the background going to be like? And all the thousands of questions that pop into your head when you first land on a location. I was just hit with those like a wall on that first TV show thing. And yeah, it was just a lot of fun. So then that was like the first paid job. And then from there, it was like doing stuff with the town. Like if they ever had events going on, I would go do like stand-up interviews and some B-roll of the event. I mean, those all paid very little to like, sometimes they were just like a stipend for like gas or something. But, at that point in my career, it was like more about getting the experience and, seeing if this was really something that I could pursue as a career possibly. And then from there, it was word of mouth. Like I've been very fortunate. I haven't had to do much advertising or hit the ground too hard with like trying to find things. I've had some slow periods where like, as soon as I start to think about like, I should probably go back onto the job boards and see what's up, I get a call and then my attention's on that. And then, just kind of one thing to the next.
Yeah. And it's like you just said, you never know who you're going to meet on set or anything, and they'll take you to another project or 20 more projects or whatever it is. I wanted to know how you two met because I know you worked on Brandon's short film and now you've done Brandon's feature film. So obviously this is a great collaborative relationship. How did you guys originally meet?
I think Brandon may have put up a listing for his short film Murder 101. Is that correct? And then I applied to it, or
Yeah, that's how it worked. And what I've learned is that when you put up a listing, whether it's a casting call or a crew call, a lot of other outlets will pick up these listings because I think all I did was post it on the website of the Philadelphia Film Office because we shot the short film in Philadelphia back in 2018. And I really just put out a general crew call looking for crew. And I had a ton of submissions. Mike was one that his work really caught my eye, just really had a great look on his reel and all of the projects he worked on. And Mike and I kind of hit it off. And then he worked on the short and slept on my couch for a couple days while we filmed it. And then we continued to stay in touch and worked on not only Plan B, but a few other projects that I directed for National Lampoon as well.
That's really cool.
that's one thing is like I don't mind crashing on couches if there's something fun to be done. I hope this never goes away, but that feeling of like a bunch of friends getting together to do something creative and project's budget should never be the limiting factor on its quality solely. There's always a way around that. There's always a creative solution. So crashing on a couch and, just bouncing around to a college and using volunteers for crew and, it's all good stuff as long as the story's good at the end.
I love that. And congrats on I saw you worked on Founders Day. How was working on that project?
That was a lot of fun. That was also a very tight schedule and could be very stressful. It was about the same size cast as this, so there's some complications to like handling them and like traveling them around and considerations with how our shooting schedule gets developed based on availability. So sometimes you'll shoot part of a scene and then you'll have to go later in the schedule and pick up the other part of it based on like who's around when. So like obviously that's a little more restrictive and not as simple as it would be if everyone's in the same room at the same time. But you work with the hand you're dealt, and I think all in all it came out really well. I'm very excited about it.
That's great. Now, I got to talk about Plan B, obviously. I'm curious. You guys had 15 days to shoot this movie. And it seems like there's a lot. You shot a lot in 15 days, like a lot of locations, a lot of different actors bopping in and out. I'm curious for you guys, what was the pre-production like? Like when you plan all these shots out, how long are you guys meeting beforehand?
We had a handful of meetings. I feel like given the nature of what the project was and that there was this element of spontaneous creativity and an ad lib nature that we wanted to invite. I don't know that we talked too much about specific shots as much as tonality and flow and pacing and things like that. So that I think we had like 4 or 5 longer conversations about that. And then when we got on site, we would do a blocking rehearsal, break to light it, figure out what angles made sense to cover it based on what the actors are doing. And then we'd go at it. And we were shooting with a single camera format. So that in some ways was a little restrictive when it came to the ad lib nature. Like whatever they settled on for how they wanted to play out the scene, they had to repeat every angle that we did as opposed to just like getting it in the can in one go, which in theory worked really well when we were planning that out. But then in practice, when we got there, there was still this yearning for a little more freedom after we maybe moved on from a master or even a master in one of the singles. And then we turn around and now there's a new idea on something, and then we have to have a quick conversation on, okay, do we have time to incorporate that idea and then circle back to get those pieces we already have again, or do we have to stick with what we're at and go with the decision that was already made? But that's a budgetary restriction to incorporate a second or third camera unit and the extra people, and it can inflate a budget quite quickly.
Yeah, and I'll say just to add into that a little bit. So, in the prep process, I think I sent this script originally to Mike probably like at least 1 year, maybe 2 years before we actually shot it. And we definitely talked maybe every few months. I would just give Mike a call and send him an update on where we were. So, I knew very early on what I wanted the movie to look like. And Mike knew that a lot as well. One thing that's pretty funny looking at now is I put together this pitch deck and really just essentially shot out the entire movie with references every single scene from scenes in other movies and really put together like this big visual lookbook pitch deck. And looking at it now, the movie looks extremely similar to this lookbook with a lot of the shots really looking almost identical to the references, which really is a testament to Mike's ability to give me and the movie the look that it deserved and the look that I wanted for it.
That's awesome. The movie looks great. It's funny because when you mentioned before having the other cameras, I'm like, that is for people making comedies who want to let the actors have that freedom and improvise and have fun on set when you're like, let's do a fun take. That's tricky when you don't have the coverage, and maybe they did it great and you didn't get their close up and you wish you had. Like, how much did you guys run into that often?
There was definitely a couple times where we got exactly what we needed, and I was like to the actors, like, "Hey, we've got an extra 5 or 10 minutes. Why don't we play around for a take?" And then maybe Jamie would say something really funny, and we didn't really have coverage of the reaction. I'm like, "All right, Mike, is there any way that we could really quickly just like reset up this shot and get John Heater's reaction of this?" And sometimes I think we had the time. A lot of times we didn't, unfortunately, and we kind of had to work some magic in the editing room. But I will say that out of all of the great improv moments that we had on set, all of the best ones ended up in the movie. There really wasn't anything that was left out because of us not having coverage, which again, kind of a testament to how well Mike managed what we were given in terms of time and just camera gear and budgetary restrictions.
I think some of that was being somewhat selective with when we had dirty coverage of how much of that foreground person we feel, so that if we needed to cheat a moment to construct something, maybe you can't really definely see the jaw moving or something too defining that locks you into like, oh, they're not saying that. Like, in case we needed to structure a moment that didn't really exist.
Interesting. Mike, how was your experience with Plan B, with working with all these actors and, on an indie film, on location?
Honestly, I think it was pretty easy and simple. I mean, part of that was, we didn't really have much in the way of stunts or special effects or visual effects or any of these like more logistically heavy things. A lot of it, not to oversimplify, is people standing in a room talking. And I think that allowed us a lot of freedom to be more creative, maybe with shot design or with the lighting, because we didn't really have anything too intricate coming at us from like the story end or from the performance end from a technical standpoint. That being said, moving locations is always something we have to be considerate of, and like how, what our gear package looks like, what our crew size looks like, and how those things kind of go hand in hand with the schedule, so that we're not like overburdening ourselves with like an unruly amount of equipment that we can't handle with these days where we might have a company move, or also just like fitting into the locations that we have. I think we had seen, I want to say most of, if not all the locations before we started, as far as like from a scout basis or even photos. I know there were some locations that changed throughout production. Like we would discover there was something that a box that wasn't quite checked with something we needed from it, whether it was like enough room for actor holding or the parking situation was just abysmal. And like, so our production guys were very quick and really good with like solving those problems as they were coming up and like keeping ahead of them. So even when we landed at a location we hadn't seen before to do something, it was really still kind of a familiar process to deploy everything needed and just find the new home.
And this is kind of a message for all of the filmmakers out there listening, especially anyone trying to put together a small project with a small crew. I did all of the location scouting entirely myself, which I definitely would not recommend for anyone out there. So I was actually going to all these locations myself. We filmed it in New Jersey, which is where I live. And I luckily had the flexibility over really like 2 months before shooting to go out and actually find all of these locations because it was shot on location. We didn't build anything. These are all real locations. But I was kind of sending all of these pictures I took and videos to Mike, and we were talking about how great the look was. There was a couple locations, like Mike mentioned, where there were issues that I didn't really think of as someone who isn't necessarily a location scout, where a day or two before filming, the first AD might call me or production coordinator and be like, "Hey, did you realize that like we need 60 extras here and there's no parking. There's like 10 parking spots. I'm like, okay, that's not really something I thought of. So there were a handful of spots, including that bar that you're in, Anna, and that scene that Mike and I actually hadn't seen that until the morning we shot there. So it really was a lot of trying to really just work on the go and saying like, all right, we're shooting this in an hour. What's the best way to shoot this? And Mike's kind of nature of being able to work quickly and efficiently really helped out with that. I think there were 2 times where we didn't see the location beforehand. For the most part, my scouting actually worked out pretty well.
Yeah, and I couldn't catch those things either because they're not part of my world. Like you're sending me these things, and all I'm looking at is like, does this work for the blocking? Does this work for the story? And I'm not thinking about parking. I'm not thinking about number of bathrooms. I that's all production's problem.
Can we plug a battery in here?
Yeah,
Do they have power for us to light this room?
There are some with like actors needing their own changing room, or even like what the sound quality is going to be like. Some places are like old buildings and they have squeaky floors. That was something I was thinking about. The parking for all the crew and background was something that slipped my mind for a couple of the shots, or how far one location is from another location. Like if we have a company move in one day, there was definitely one spot that we were supposed to film at, and I didn't fully realize that it was going to be like probably a 30-minute drive or something like that. And it would have taken probably like 3 hours to pack up all the stuff, drive, and then get set up at the next spot. So that's something else that really all filmmakers should be aware of. And on bigger films, you have more luxury with specialized crew members who know these things. But when you're someone trying to put the whole thing together yourself, for the most part, there really is a lot that goes into this. And there's a reason why there are specific jobs for all these roles.
That's super helpful. I was going to ask, Mike, you say it was easy and it was fun and it was, there were a couple bumps in the road. I'm curious when like you guys when you're running out of time, because a lot of stuff happens on set that's out of your control. And then when you need to get a scene in because you either are losing that actor that day, you're losing that location because it's really a quick shoot, what's the most important thing for you when you have to make those kinds of calls on like what shots you really need?
I think that starts to become more of a hybrid conversation where like Brandon and I would talk about the scene and like we'd kind of take a step back if we're running short on time, and instead of rushing into it maybe haphazard way, I think we pump the brakes for a sec. We take a step back and say, okay, what's the scene about? What's happening in it? And then once we've figured out those things, at the core of what it needs to be, we determine if there's a moment or a beat that can be lost and we can just cut and omit from the script. If there's a simpler form of blocking, like maybe it's a scene where like, oh, someone's supposed to come in and then they go to a dresser and then they sit on a bed. And it's like, okay, well, now they're just going to come in and they're going to just post up on this door frame and that's it. And it's not as interesting, but it makes it in the movie. And sometimes things just need to exist to convey story and move us along. And if every scene is like that, the movie's not going to go anywhere and it's no one's going to have a good time. But with a tight schedule and, the amount of work on our plate that we have, on occasion, if you're up against it, that's the solution, is to simplify something. And then there's also an option of like trying to make blocking sort of really work within the selective framings that you have. So like, let's say you had a scene that was supposed to be like 7 pieces and it's like, okay, these people are moving around these places. Okay, well, is there a camera position that can work where the coverage can hand off from person to person? You take those 7 pieces and pare it down to 2, where it's just like instead of covering every person's action in its own individual frame, it can just hand off and evolve as coverage is happening. So it's like maybe this angle is not on this person, but it's really on this side of the room. And then as people are coming in and out of that side of the room, you're catching that coverage. And then you have a complementing angle from somewhere else that can pick up the rest of it. And then either you already know when you're planning this or you do those two. And then you're like, okay, are there gaps? Are there things we missed? And what solves that the fastest too? And a lot of it is this triage situation where there are no like clear answers, but there's definitely like tools I have found, at least in my experience, to help guide me to faster, more appropriate solutions. And in some of those situations, it's been amazing. Like something evolves in a way that you hadn't anticipated and you're just like, oh my god, this is better than what we were planning on doing, to the point of feeling like a very curated, designed, choreographed sort of scene, like a dance, and it just kind of fell out that way.
That's cool.
Yeah, I'd say just to add into that, there definitely were some times on the film where Mike and I kind of mapped out what we wanted. The shooting day didn't really allow it. And then we have like 20 minutes. I'm like, all right, Mike, we've got 20 minutes. What's the best way to like get a shot that's going to be usable in the movie? And that's kind of unfortunately like the reality of what filmmaking is a lot of the times. And there was a couple that really stood out that Mike did an amazing job of helping us set up, like a oneer, which if you're not really familiar is like filming the entire scene in one shot.
You talking about the mirror?
One is the mirror shot.
Yeah.
I will say, spoiler alert, that scene got significantly cut down in the movie. It's still in the movie, but it's not that impressive of a oneer as is in the final movie. But
No one knows that though. That's the thing. No one knows anything aside from what we are delivering to them at the end of the day. They don't know what was left on the floor and they don't know how we pared it down. But that's a perfect example of what we're talking about, where we had a scene that was 4 pages, 5 pages, and it got pared down to I think two-ish.
yeah, it's definitely a much shorter scene. But yeah, we filmed that as a oneer. Another one that really steps out or stands out, I'll say, is there's a scene in the nightclub with a character played by Blaze French, where it's Jamie and Suba, the character to Piper and Maya, and this character in the nightclub is behind them. And we did a great job of being able to really just fit all of them within one shot and pans over to Blaze in the background. And it looks great. And one other shot as well with Cameron's parents, played by Tom Berenger and Susie Savoy, where they're kind of dancing in the background through this window. And that shot really was kind of a last minute thing as well, because one, we were running late, and two, we were supposed to shoot outside and it was raining. So we had to pivot and make that entire scene interior, which is a other obstacle in itself.
That's great. I love that because I think for people listening, whether you're a cinematographer or a writer or any, you have to be flexible. I think whatever you put on the page is great to get it made, but then you kind of have to, like you guys are saying, you kind of have to just roll with the weather, the sound, the parking situation, whatever you guys can really do. But congrats to you because you figured it out. I mean, it looks tight, the movie doesn't look like you had any blips in filming anything.
Good.
Yeah, definitely. This was so much fun. I wanted to know, is there anything else you're working on or, excited about that you're doing right now?
I'm in post on I think 4 features, and I'm prepping on 4 right now, and 3 of them are about to go into production. Almost back to back. Doing a drama out in LA starting at the end of the week, and then I go straight from that to a job in West Virginia for all of October, and then I've got another feature in January, and then the last one's like a little further out. It's in August of 25, so I've got a little more time to prep on that. But like they're stacking up, and I'm very excited about all of them. Actually, I mean they're all very different genres and topics and sort of stories. They're all lending themselves to very different visual sort of languages and types of movement that are being incorporated. So it's really kind of creatively inspiring to like be balancing those kinds of plates all at once because they're just such different projects.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you have a favorite genre? That made me want to ask you that.
Not necessarily. I think that there's something kind of fun and unique about each one, whether you're playing into or against the tropes of them. I will say that like I've done quite a few horror films in the past, I would say 4 or 5 years, and I was not a big horror person before that, but it has been very interesting within that landscape to learn a lot of those tropes and like how audience plays on them and psychologically and what they expect of different things and how can we either lean into that or subvert that with like kind of teasing them with like a fake out or misdirection and just kind of like psychologically setting an audience up in a different space. Whereas like in something like comedy or drama, a lot of times it's about like complimenting something. And then in horror, it's been a little bit about like maybe making someone feel uneasy intentionally, which is like a very different sort of pathway to walk. But yeah, they're all a lot of fun. I think it's really about like whatever the story is, and if the characters are good and like if the arc of the story feels really authentic and well fleshed out, and there's like something unique about it that like I don't see coming. That definitely gets me hooked in.
I love that. That's awesome. Well, congrats to you. Where can people find you, and hire you and watch your films and TV projects?
The films are kind of all over the place because I mean I'm not distributing, so like I mean I'm just a gun for hire, which is also part of the fun is they take on a life of their own, and I someday will see them just randomly out in the world. Or like I was on a plane a few days ago, and someone a couple seats over was watching one of my movies from like 2015 or something like that. But it was just like interesting to see like
What movie?
it was called The Wrong Pod. It was a sci-fi comedy that I did in Rhode Island. I don't know where it is. Everything's everywhere now. It's just wild how some of these things, because they are indies. Like, I haven't shot a studio picture, so everything is like the little engine that could, and it's just amazing to like see them out on their own in the world, and you run across it like it's a neighbor you haven't seen in 20 years, and you're just like, what are you doing here? Yeah, and then as far as finding me, I mean, Instagram is probably the most like out. I think I have a website. I don't really keep up with it. I should, but it would just be, I think, MikeMagilnick.com or Mike.Magilnick.com, and then Instagram is just Mike Magilnick. Luckily, there's very, 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 very few Magilnicks, so that's kind of a advertising perk on its own.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us on the show. It's super interesting to hear what it's like. You guys just you're like, all right, 15 days. We got to come out with the guns blazing. We got this, and congrats that you guys were able to figure that out and make a really cool movie. So I'm excited for you.
Thank you.
Go hire Mike and everybody watch Plan B. Thanks so much.